He had spent a lifetime mastering control. Control of the stage, control of his voice, control of every room he ever walked into. But near the end something shifted. The confidence was still there, but quieter. The voice that once commanded arenas now carried something heavier. Not weakness, but reflection. Not performance, but truth. And when Frank Sinatra finally spoke about the man who had stood beside him for decades, the world leaned in. Because for over 50 years, people had whispered about him, about Sammy Davis Jr., about what really existed between them. Friendship? Brotherhood? Something deeper? But when Sinatra finally addressed it, he didn't confirm anything. He didn't deny anything either. What he gave instead was something far more powerful. A truth that didn't need explanation. To understand it, you have to go back, before the fame, before the controversy, before the whispers, to a smoky backstage room in Detroit. 1. The Michigan Theater buzzed with energy that night. The air was thick with cigarette smoke, laughter, and the kind of anticipation that only live performance could create. It was the kind of place where dreams were made, or quietly broken. At just 25 years old, Frank Sinatra was already becoming a sensation. He was the golden voice of the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra. Women screamed his name. Men studied his style. He wasn't just singing songs, he was changing what it meant to feel them. But that night, he wasn't the only act trying to leave a mark. Sharing the stage was a small vaudeville group, barely known, constantly traveling, surviving more than thriving. The Will Maston Trio. And with them, a 16-year-old boy, Sammy Davis Jr. Sammy had never known a normal childhood. While other kids played in streets and went to school, he lived under stage lights. He traveled city to city, performing in places that barely paid enough to eat. His life was applause followed by silence. That night, during a quiet moment between performances, Sinatra walked into the backstage break room. And there he saw him, a young black performer sitting alone eating a sandwich. There was no spotlight, no audience, no music, just two people from completely different worlds. Sinatra didn't hesitate. He walked over and sat down. No grand introduction, no dramatic exchange, no recognition of status, just a conversation. To Sinatra, it might have been a simple gesture, but to Sammy, it was unforgettable. Because in that moment, Sinatra didn't see a black performer. He didn't see someone beneath him. He saw a man. And in 1941, that distinction meant everything. America at the time was deeply divided. Segregation wasn't just a social norm, it was the law of the land in many places. Where you ate, where you slept, where you performed, all of it was dictated by the color of your skin. For a white star like Sinatra, even being seen casually talking to a black performer could damage his career. But he didn't care. And Sammy never forgot that. In fact, long before that meeting, Sammy had admired Sinatra from a distance. He kept a scrapbook filled with newspaper clippings, showing them proudly to his family. But it wasn't just the voice he admired. It was the freedom. Sinatra could walk into any room, speak his mind, command respect. For Sammy, that kind of life felt almost unimaginable. But that brief conversation in Detroit planted something inside him. A belief that maybe, just maybe, things didn't have to stay the way they were. 3 years later, that belief would be tested. In 1944, Sammy Davis Jr. was drafted into the U.S. Army. He hoped, like many others, that wearing a uniform might bring some sense of equality. It didn't. Instead, it exposed him to some of the harshest racism he had ever experienced. He was beaten, humiliated, called names that cut deeper than any physical wound. In one degrading moment, he was even forced to paint his face white during a performance meant to entertain white soldiers. It was cruelty disguised as humor. But Sammy endured, and somehow he transformed pain into performance. He joined an entertainment unit, using music and comedy not just to survive, but to stay human. During those long, isolating nights, he found comfort in something familiar. A short film, The House I Live In, starring Frank Sinatra. In the film, Sinatra defends a young boy being bullied for his religion, delivering a message that America belongs to everyone, regardless of race or background. To many, it was just a film. To Sammy, it felt personal. It felt like Sinatra was speaking directly to him, reminding him that dignity was worth fighting for. When the war ended, Sammy returned home in 1945, bruised but not broken, determined but changed, and he carried with him a quiet promise to live with the same courage he had seen in Sinatra. He didn't know it yet, but their paths would cross again, and when they did, it would change both of their lives forever. By 1947, Sinatra's fame had exploded. He wasn't just a singer anymore, he was a phenomenon. So, when he was invited to headline at New York's prestigious Capitol Theater, expectations were high. But Sinatra had one condition. He wanted the Will Maston Trio as his opening act. The decision shocked organizers. A relatively unknown black group, opening for the biggest star in America? It was risky, controversial, potentially career-damaging. But Sinatra didn't budge. He insisted. And more than that, he demanded they be paid 5 times their usual rate. That night, Sammy stepped onto the stage in front of a largely white audience. The tension was thick, but within minutes, it disappeared. His talent was undeniable, his energy electric, his presence impossible to ignore. By the end of the performance, the same audience that had been unsure was on its feet, applauding. When Sammy walked backstage, Sinatra was waiting, smiling. "I told him you'd kill it." For Sammy, it wasn't just applause. It was validation. But success didn't erase reality. In places like Las Vegas, the contradiction was brutal. Black performers could headline shows, but couldn't stay in the hotels they performed in. They could entertain crowds, but couldn't eat in the same restaurants. It was a system built on hypocrisy, and Sinatra refused to accept it. On one occasion, when Sammy was denied a room at the Sands Hotel, Sinatra made his position clear. "If he can't stay here, neither will I." That wasn't a suggestion. It was a threat, and it worked. The hotel backed down. And just like that, a line had been crossed, not just for Sammy, but for the entire industry. Their bond grew stronger. But it wasn't simple, because no matter how close they became, the world still saw them differently. Sinatra was the gatekeeper, the one with power. Sammy was the one who still had to prove himself again and again. There was love, but there was also imbalance, and both men knew it. In 1954, tragedy struck. Sammy was involved in a devastating car accident that left him blind in one eye. When he woke up in the hospital, Sinatra was there. He didn't just visit. He took care of everything: medical bills, doctors, recovery arrangements. He even opened his home to Sammy. Years later, Sammy would say something that revealed everything about their relationship. "When I lost my eye, the first place I went was Frank's house, because I had nowhere else to go." That wasn't just friendship. That was trust. By the late 1950s, they were part of something legendary: the Rat Pack, alongside Dean Martin, Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop. On stage, they were unstoppable. Funny, charismatic, effortless. But behind the laughter, things were more complicated. Sammy often became the target of racial jokes. The audience laughed. Sammy laughed too. But not everything that looks like humor feels like it. Off stage, the weight lingered, and criticism followed. Some accused him of tolerating disrespect for acceptance. Others questioned his loyalty to his own community. And in the middle of it all stood Sinatra, defending him, supporting him, but also never fully understanding what it felt like to be him. Their relationship wasn't perfect. There were arguments, moments of anger, times when loyalty was tested. At one point, after a public disagreement, Sinatra cut Sammy out of projects entirely. For months, there was silence, distance, but eventually reconciliation, because what they had built was stronger than pride. As the 1960s unfolded, the world began to change. Civil rights movements gained momentum. Voices grew louder, and both Sinatra and Sammy stood together, raising money, supporting leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., and pushing for change in an industry resistant to it. But even then, complications remained. When Sammy married Swedish actress May Britt, backlash was immediate. And when political pressures forced him to be excluded from a presidential inauguration, he helped support. It hurt, deeply. And once again, Sinatra was there. Not with solutions, but with loyalty. Time passed, careers evolved, the spotlight softened. By the 1980s, both men were older, tired, but still connected. When they reunited for one final tour, it wasn't about fame anymore. It was about history, about memory, about something that had survived decades of change. Then, in 1990, the inevitable happened. Sammy Davis Jr. passed away, and for the first time in decades, Sinatra was alone. At the funeral, he didn't perform, didn't speak publicly, but he carried the coffin, quietly, and when asked to say something, he kept it simple. I wish the world could have known Sammy the way I did. That was it. No explanations, no clarifications, just truth. 8 years later, Sinatra followed. And just like that, 2 lives, 2 legends, 1 story, came to an end. But maybe the Real story was never about rumors. Maybe it was never about labels. Maybe it was about something much harder to define. Loyalty, respect, love in its most human form. Unspoken, unexplained, unbreakable. And maybe the reason Sinatra never gave the world a clear answer is because some truths don't belong to the world. They belong to the people who live them. So, what do you think? Was it just friendship? Or something deeper that words could never fully capture? Maybe the real answer is in everything they never said.